Coming up on Arirang News, Typhoon Bavi has reached South Korean shores, bringing dangerously strong winds and high waves to Jeju Island right now and due in Seoul by early tomorrow. South Korea reports more than 300 new cases of the coronavirus as the government considers raising the level of social distancing yet again and pleads with people to follow the guidelines in place already. And the South Korean government, working on next year's budget, is pledged to make high school free of charge. It'll also use the Korean New Deal initiative to shore up public benefits and revive the economy. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. One of the year's most powerful typhoons has arrived in South Korea. It'll reach Seoul early Thursday morning. Right now, it's over Jeju Island and parts of the Jeollanam-do Provinces. Our Min-suk-hyun reports.
Starting Wednesday morning, a typhoon advisory has been put in place for Jeju and parts of Jeollanam-do Province. Typhoon Bavi is rapidly heading north and by the evening will reach waters southwest of Mokpo. According to the Korean Meteorological Administration, the storm is expected to have a maximum wind speed of about 160 kilometers an hour, strong enough to topple trees and make it hard for people to walk. Currently, Jeju and the southwest of the country are seeing heavy showers with 30 to 60 millimeters per hour of rainfall. Due to strong winds and rough seas, flights and ferries are not running between Jeju and the mainland. Around 330 flights and almost 2,000 ferry services have been cancelled. About 80 schools in Jeollanam-do Province have also turned to remote learning. By early Thursday morning, the typhoon is forecast to pass by the Greater Seoul area before making landfall over North Korea. The weather agency is advising people to take necessary precautions for public safety and to prevent property damage. Min-suk-hyun, Arirang News.
Now let's check in with one of our reporters who's standing by just to the west of Seoul. Our Choi Won-jung is at a pier in the city of Incheon. Won-jung, what's the situation right now?
Well, good afternoon, Devin. It's been I've been standing here, Yeollanam Pier in Incheon since about 12 p.m. Like I mentioned earlier, newscast that the typhoon is expected to make a landfall soon. We could see some clear skies right now, but it's starting to get a little cloudier, and we can feel a little bit gust of wind as well. It's still difficult to say exactly when the typhoon will arrive, but I spoke to one of the officials from the Incheon Port Authority on the phone this afternoon, and he said the fishing boats and ferries have been secured to their docks. They also started a 24-hour monitoring system to prevent strong winds and heavy rain from damaging the port or the boats. I do want to point out that the local district in Incheon has already made some announcement urging local fishermen and residents to take precaution. Once again, it's still a fairly calm scene here, but have more updates for the later newscast. Back to you, Devin.
All right, Won-jung, thank you for that. We'll check back in with you later. Now, South Korea, in other news, has reported 320 new cases of COVID-19 on Wednesday, mainly in the Seoul area. The government's urging the public to strictly abide by social distancing measures. Jang Tae-hyun has this report.
The number of daily COVID-19 cases reported in South Korea has increased to 320 on Wednesday. Out of those, 307 were local transmissions and 13 were imported cases. There were 2 more deaths, raising the death toll to 312. Wednesday's 320 cases come after the number of new cases had dropped below 300 on Monday and Tuesday, following nearly 400 new infections reported on Sunday. The country has reported triple digits of new cases for 13 days in a row now. Many of the early cases came from cluster infections at the Arirang Church in Seoul and an anti-government rally on South Korea's National Liberation Day on August 15th. As of noon Tuesday, the total number of COVID-19 infections related to the Arirang Church was tallied at 915. Another 193 cases reported as of Tuesday were related to the rally at the Gwanghwamun Square on August 15th. The authorities are urging the public to follow the strict rules, saying if the trend continues, it could impose Level 3 social distancing measures. Under Level 3, the country's economy would take a direct hit, as the nation would basically go into a collective shutdown with gatherings of more than 10 people prohibited. As the nation battles a surge in cases, all kindergartens, elementary, middle, and high schools in the Seoul metropolitan area returned to remote learning on Wednesday. The emergency return did not apply to high school seniors who are preparing for the upcoming National University entrance exam in December. Chung, Arirang News.
And as reported, the South Korean government is weighing whether to raise the level of social distancing again to the highest level, level 3. Prime Minister Chung said Wednesday, however, that level 3 social distancing would bring both economic and social activities to a halt. He added that the most urgent task is to fully and properly implement level 2, and he called on the public to cooperate and stick to the guidelines. South Korea has added more than 3,500 new coronavirus cases in the past 2 weeks. And because of the resurgence in cases, hospitals in the Seoul area are filling up quickly. According to the city government on Wednesday, the hospital bed utilization rate has risen to 75.1%, a 9 percentage point increase from a day earlier. The city is hurrying to secure more beds so it doesn't run out. From tomorrow, it's going to open up another community treatment center with more than 200 beds, and it's working to add more for critical patients at municipal hospitals. Singapore is going to start requiring people arriving from South Korea to be quarantined at dedicated facilities instead of at their own homes. Starting from this Saturday, all people arriving in Singapore from South Korea, including those who only transferred planes in Korea, must stay at these facilities for 14 days and get tested for the virus. South Korea was previously classified by Singapore as a low-risk country, which enabled travelers to quarantine at home. The South Korean government and the ruling Democratic Party, working on next year's budget, have pledged to make public high schools free of charge starting next year. Right now, they cost around $1,400 a year. In their meeting Wednesday, they also agreed to increase public spending to speed up the economic recovery and shore up social welfare programs. For the Korean New Deal initiative, they want to budget more than $17 billion. Most of that money will be used to carry out 10 key projects, including the building of smart schools and pursuing a shift to eco-friendly energy. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news on this Wednesday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Yang Jun-seok, professor of economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Professor Yang, good to have you back on.
Happy to be here.
Well, we see the tensions between the U.S. and China easing somewhat when it comes to trade, also getting ever closer to a vaccine, but stocks on Wall Street overnight were mixed. What's the story in the global markets and here in Korea?
Okay, well, after rising most of the last weekend on Monday, the U.S. stock, as you just mentioned, had a mixed performance. S&P and NASDAQ continued to rise very slightly, but Dow fell slightly. Fundamentally, it seems like it's just a part of the normal up and down of the market, but the rise in S&P and NASDAQ may reflect the tech shares in the stock indices, which are doing incredibly well. The Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, and so on, compared to, say, manufacturing stocks, which are doing somewhat mediocrely because of the COVID virus. The lowering of the Dow may also represent the changes in Dow index, which is happening right now. They're dropping 3 companies and adding new companies, so that may account for some of the differences between the Dow index and the other indices. And then another factor is that the Fed will hold a meeting of monetary policy, what they call the Jackson Hole meeting on Thursday, and people are waiting to see what the Fed Chairman Powell will say. So the stock market seems to be in sort of a holding pattern, and even the U.S.-China high-level meeting did very little to help or hurt the market. Both sides in the meeting, the U.S. side and the Chinese side, both reaffirmed commitment to the Phase 1 trade deal, even though China is running far behind the pace and purchasing promised amount of U.S. goods. For example, China has only bought about 20% of what it promised for agricultural goods and about 5% of what it promised to buy for energy goods. But both sides have an incentive to keep the deal going right now. China to reduce the friction between the U.S. and China on trade, for President Trump on the U.S. side to do better on his re-election possibilities. Now, European market and the Asian market, they also seem to be in a holding pattern. Again, they seem to be waiting to see what Chairman Powell will say in the Jackson Hole meeting, and that also applies to Korea as well. KOSPI and KOSDAQ has been rising this week, and it rose today as well, but the percentage of increase has fallen drastically, and again, the interpretation seems to be that everybody's sort of waiting to see what the Fed will say.
Well, now there are some signs of weakness in Korea's manufacturing sector, which has been supporting the local economy while other sectors have been hit so hard. This could further impact employment. Tell us about that and what might be done about it.
Okay, well, the research institute in Korea has published a report saying that of the 10 major industries in Korea, 2 are not doing very well. That's rubber and plastics and processed metals. 3 are in sort of a holding pattern. It's not improving or not worsening. That includes the automobile industry. And 5 industries are productivity is increasing. That includes electronics and semiconductors. But fundamentally, I think it does reflect what a lot of people have been saying about the Korean economy lately, which is that the productivity is too low. For example, the last OECD report, which came out a few weeks ago, the Korean labor productivity was ranked 31st out of 36 countries in the OECD, around the level of Poland, Greece, and Latvia, and way below the OECD average. And also, Korea has the 5th largest level of product market regulations, which implies that there's less competition, so less room for innovation, improvement, and also relatively higher prices for the same good. And similar results were seen in the IMD International Competitiveness Report that was issued earlier in the year. So we do need to get more competitive. We do need to get the Korean economy to have higher productivity. Things that require are things like regulatory reform, more competition between Korean companies, labor market productivity, but existing interest groups, not only unions, but Korean firms, which have various economic rents because of various protections given to them by laws and regulations. So these interest groups make such reforms very difficult. And this Moon administration seems to be concentrating more on the demand side, or even restricting further the room to maneuver for Korean companies, rather than giving them more freedom and more room to try to raise their productivity. But we'll have to raise our productivity if we want to improve the economy and improve employment and raise wages down the line.
Well, staying on the subject of the government and the economy, the ruling party and the administration have approved revisions to 3 key laws related to the economy. These affect the Commercial Act, the law on fair trade, and the law on the regulation of financial groups. There's so much in these revisions to talk about, but tell us a bit about that.
Okay, well, there's so many diverse things that are included in these 3 laws that I'm only going to hit on the things that interest me. One is that now in Korea, traditionally, only the Fair Trade Commission was able to prosecute anti-competitive acts like collusion and misuse of market power. But now the Ministry of Justice, the prosecutor's office, can also investigate and prosecute such anti-competitive acts. This is actually similar to the United States, where the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice have joint responsibility for controlling collusion. And then the penalties for collusions and misuse of market power has gone up. For example, for collusion, the maximum penalty rose from 10% of relevant sales to 20%. Misuse of market power penalties rose from 3% of relevant sales to 6% of relevant sales, but I think that's still very too low. as I mentioned in the last question, one of the big problems about Korea is that there's too little competition. So we really need to put a lot of force behind these anti-competitive fair trade acts. And then changes in Commercial Act includes changes in the legal responsibility of parent companies to their subsidiaries, and the parent companies may be liable for mismanagement of subsidiary companies. It also allows electronic elections of auditors and other officials of firms. Another change with these three laws is that the new laws limit the voting rights by major stockholders. It's aimed mostly at chaebol families. So no matter how much stock you have, even if you have 50 to 60%, you can only exercise 20% of the voting rights. I'm not sure if that's a good idea. Usually you want the decision to be in the hands of people who have most to lose, those who have most skin in the game, but limiting the voting rights to 20%, even if they have a lot more stock, seems to be the wrong way to go.
Fascinating point there, Professor. We'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much for coming on, as always.
Thank you.
And that does it for this newscast. Thank you for watching.